Hey, Harford County. I'm Emily Adolph of The Soul Lift. You may remember me as a guest on Rich's podcast. Well, I'm back with something special.
And I'm Ona Crow. We're introducing Nourish and Connect, a gathering space designed to bring people together that feels authentic, supportive, and uplifting.
This is about real relationships, shared wisdom, and growth.
Our gatherings nourish with mindful experiences and reflective activities to leave you inspired.
And they're designed to connect with intentional conversations and welcoming community where you truly belong.
They're the second Wednesday of every month. Join us on April 9th at Doss Beer Hall in Bel Air from 5:30 to 7 p.m. to celebrate spring.
And mark your calendars for May 14th and June 11th. We have amazing experiences planned for summer.
Come as you are and let's grow together.
Hey everyone, it's Rich Bennett. Can you believe it? The show is turning 10 this year. I am so grateful for each and every one of you who've tuned in, shared an episode, or even joined the conversation over the years. You're the reason that this podcast has grown into what it is today. Together, we've shared laughs, tears, and moments that truly matter. So I want to thank you for being part of this journey. Let's make the next 10 years even better.
Coming to you from the Freedom Federal Credit Union Studios, Harford County Living presents Conversations with Rich Bennett.
Slow pitch affairs today.
It's probably the least sexy part of the organizing. No. The truth is,
Today on Conversations with Rich Bennett, we have a truly inspiring guest joining us, Jessica Morris. Jessica is the author of Higher Powered, One Woman's Journey of Personal Eschatology, a powerful book that explores her personal transformation through addiction, trauma, and faith. After growing up with an alcoholic, abusive, and hypocritical minister father, Jessica turned away from organized religion and found herself trapped in the depths of addiction. But after hitting rock bottom, she began a journey of recovery that led her not just to healing, but to a profound spiritual awakening. Through seminary studies and deep personal reflection, she uncovered what she now calls personal eschatology, the idea that true transformation happens when we die to ourselves and embrace a personal relationship with Jesus. Now Jessica's on a mission to share her journey and help others experience their own spiritual rebirth. And I am honored to have her here today. And this is not going to be the first time you hear from her because she already agreed to come on again. So how you doing, Jessica?
I'm great. It's wonderful to be here, Rich. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So before we get into the book, I have to ask you, what is eschatology?
Great question. And that's actually getting into the book. It's funny when I
knew that. I was just testing you.
When I was in seminary studying it, I told my older sister about it, and she said to me, "Is that an English word?" And, because very few people have ever heard that word. It's very much a theologian's term, let's say, a minister's term. But basically what it is, if you break the word down, it means the study of end times. Okay. So
end times.
So I'll give you some examples that are in the book. There's several examples of forms of eschatology that are accepted within the theological circles. One that you're probably most familiar with would be apocalyptic eschatology, which is like what the book of Revelation talks about. It's something that's coming in the future. It's like a prophecy. Okay.
Right.
Then there's also realized eschatology, which is another really very well accepted form within theological circles. If you read the Gospel of John, that's where Jesus often says when he's speaking, the time is now. And that's what realized eschatology would be, which is the end of things is happening right now before your eyes. And most forms of, in fact, all the forms of eschatology that I could find when I was researching had to do with messages to the whole world, all of humanity at the same time. And what happened to me when I was sitting in, I spent a lot of time seeking in my life. Because of the way I'd been brought up, I was trying to learn everything for myself. I wanted to learn it from my point of view. And when I was sitting in Intro to New Testament, so this was like my second class in seminary, and I had, I'd been to Sunday school. I'd heard all these stories before, but I was hearing them and seeing them in a completely different way now. And the professor that I had was very analytical. He was true academic, PhD. He wasn't a minister. And so he came at everything from that lens. And he talked a lot about the symbolism, the metaphor, all that's within the writings and within the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I thought to myself, we were talking about Revelation. It was towards the end of the semester. And he was talking about all the metaphor and the symbolism that's used in Revelation with all the numbers. There's a lot of numerology in Revelation and all that. And I thought to myself, and I even wrote it in the margin of my notebook, what if Jesus was being metaphorical when he was talking about his second coming, and he actually meant he was going to come just for me, just for you. It was because everybody talks about how your relationship with Jesus is so personal. So why wouldn't he come back just for me? Yeah. And everything that I know from my travels in the world of recovery from addiction is seeing people, their entire world is turned upside down when they come into recovery. And if they stay, they very quickly become almost unmatched to what they used to be. People who used to know them can hardly recognize them anymore. I mean, not just physically, but the way they behave, everything about them is completely different. And so I thought, why wouldn't it be a personal return just for me? And it took me back to a moment in my life when I was about 6 years, this was about 6 years before I got into recovery. This all happened in this one afternoon. It was very odd. I had that thought in my class. I wrote it down, and then I went over to the library and I had this memory from when it was like I said, it was about 6 years before I got into recovery, and I had gone back to my old alma mater to party. It was like a year after I graduated, and I was that person. I'm going to go back and have a party with the people who are still in college. And I went outside the party. It was very cold, so I was all by myself to smoke a cigarette. And the sky was just so clear. There were however many millions and gazillions of stars that any physicist can come up with. That's how many stars were shining down at me. And I just started yelling at God. I was yelling at God because I hated my life. I hated myself. I didn't understand why everybody else around me was getting married, had great jobs. And here I was working a temp job, living with my parents, a year after college, coming back and still partying with the people who were there. Like what a waste I was, And so I'm yelling at God, and I had this overwhelming feeling. And I didn't turn my face to look, but I knew with every fiber of my being that Jesus was standing right next to me on my left.
Wow.
Every time I tell this story, I get a chill through my arms. Like I know he's validating it for me right now as I tell.
Right.
He was there because I was calling for him. And in yelling at God, he was like, okay, I'm here. And I chose in that moment, and it's important that I say, I chose in that moment to run back into the party. It scared me so much that he was standing there. As much as I had like a feeling of warmth and calm for sort of a millisecond, I then went into this enormous shame and fear, and I couldn't look him in the face. And so I turned and I ran back into the party. And those 6 years between that moment and when I got into recovery were hell. It was absolute living hell on earth, as they would say, or as Jesus would say in the Gospels, that if you, I'm going to come back and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth for those who do not follow.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what happened to me. Those 6 years were the most lonely, depressed, hopeless, helpless, powerless. I mean, I can't even tell you all the words that fill those 6 years. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. And so when I had that memory, I was like, he did come back for me. He came back directly for me, and I turned my face from him. And I became so ashamed and horrified in that moment, remembering that. I remember I was sitting in the library, and I was so horrified. And it's taken me years to get to the place where I don't regret that moment anymore. Because for a long time, I really regretted it. But what I've come to realize is that those 6 years needed to happen in order to get me to the place. You can see a lot of things in hindsight, right? So as I look back on it, they needed to happen in order to get me to move to the town in which I found recovery, and the town in which I found the counselor, or I didn't really find anything. I was led to by other people, led to recovery, led to the counselor who was able to help me with the trauma of my childhood and to overcome those things. And also, without ever saying the name of Jesus, that counselor showed me the love of Jesus like I had never seen it in my life before. And to this day, and he's in heaven now, that counselor. And to this day, I know God wanted me in this town to meet that man, because it's a lot of it's in the book. A lot of what I talk about, it's in the book, but it was amazing to work with him. And I needed to be at a place where I was so desperate that I was ready to just go, okay, fine, whatever. If you tell me to do it, I'll do it. If you say I'll feel better, I don't care, because I'm tired of feeling like crap. And so that's a really, really long answer to what is eschatology, but that's basically how I came to this idea of it being a personal thing, not necessarily, not necessarily something for all the world to experience at once. Now, I'm not saying that's not true, or those ideas may not be realities at some point. I'm just saying this is like sort of a both and situation where Jesus is coming back and saying, this is the time now. I'm ready to take you, and I believe you're ready, And so when I turned and ran from him because I could not look him in the face, what he did for me through my recovery community is he just kept coming to me through the people in recovery until I was able to look him directly in the face.
Wow.
It was absolutely, like, in hindsight, I can see all of this. At the time, I had no idea what was going on. I just knew I loved these people.
Right.
Yeah.
God, man, that is, and the good thing is you got out of town, because when it comes, well, seriously, because I'm talking to other people in recovery, a lot of them go to a different town, even a different state, in order to succeed in recovery.
Yeah.
Because what happens if you do it where you're at, where you're from, where it all started, you're right back in the same boat again.
Yeah. It can work. It can work.
It can.
It really was what happened. I think what happened to me when I moved is that, because I was about a year, the end of my recovery was in the town where I live now, which is where the end of my addiction was in the town where I found recovery. And it was about a year. And that's where I met the counselor, not the one I was just talking about, but a counselor that I saw for about a year prior to recovery. And she actually sent me to recovery. She said to me, after a year of me giving her $90 a week, she said, I really think you need to deal with this food addiction before any of this trauma stuff we work on is ever going to take hold, because the food is in your way. It's in the way of anything you're going to receive from God or anything you're going to receive from me. And until you get that piece under control, because that was my very first addiction, she's like, nothing is going to take. And she was absolutely right. It was in the way of everything in my life, everything.
Okay, so with that person that really helped you in recovery in the other town, you said is in heaven now.
Yes, yeah.
Do you feel that that may have been Jesus himself?
Well, yes, I do believe that Jesus incarnate is in all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And when we are willing, it's funny because back then I used to call that guy my channel to God.
Okay.
And that's what I believe Jesus does with us. You know, when we allow the room within ourselves, which means we need to clear out all this crap that is getting in the way, whether it's childhood trauma, addiction, ego, enormous ego, whatever it is, we've got to say, you know what, I'm going to give that up, that thing, because a lot of people, and I was one of them, like to hold on to that victim identity. I'm like this because my dad was an alcoholic. I mean, I could, when I was in college, I had a way to rationalize a hangnail that I had out of somehow my dad made it happen because he was an alcoholic.
Wow.
I mean, I was just really good at making everything his fault, and it's like, it's time to take responsibility for myself. I'm a grown up. And it's time for me to say, do I want to remain a victim the rest of my life, or do I want to actually live my life?
Yeah. Be cleansed.
Exactly.
And we all need a good cleansing.
Yes, we do.
Oh.
And yeah.
What's that?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and for me, it's a continual cycle. It's not like I'm born again and now, whoopsie, I'm good. Graduation day, off you go.
Oh, no.
It's a constant, I'm constantly dying to pieces of myself so that I can better follow Jesus.
Well, and that's the cleansing part.
Yeah.
You think about it. When you clean yourself, you get a shower every day, twice a day.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you're summertime like me, 3 times a day, but you're constantly. This is something I really don't understand about a lot of people. They will cleanse their body every day, but they will not cleanse their soul.
Yep.
And or their mind. And I've never understood that.
Yeah.
Never understood that. So with the book.
Yes.
Because you begin the book with a deeply personal reflection on your father and how your early experiences, with faith and everything. So how did your relationship with your father shape your understanding of God, and how has that evolved over time?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I think one that a lot of people struggle with, because the traditional idea for God is masculine. I mean, that's just the nature of it, right?
Yeah.
And I grew up in the United Methodist Church, which is a Christian affiliated church. And so Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Okay. So that's, the general terms. So if you've got a great human father, that's a good start to understanding who God is, right? If your human father is pretty flawed, it's going to be a little more difficult, especially when you're a little kid and your dad is also the minister. So your dad's the minister. He is an alcoholic, and he's an alcoholic of the type that there are a lot of different types of alcoholics, but my father was an alcoholic who was the life of the party when he was outside of our home. We lived in a very small town. And so there were a lot of hunters, sort of good old boys, Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they liked to, they were hardworking people. They liked to have a couple beers after work, that sort of thing. And the fact that my dad, who was the minister, was with them, I think made everybody feel a little bit better about themselves. because the
Right.
minister was doing it too. And he smoked, and I mean, this was the 70s. So he smoked and he drank and he partied with them. And there was probably some other extracurricular activities that we won't go into here. But when he came home, it was a little bit different. Those of us in the home. And interestingly enough, I think it might have been harder for me and one of my siblings as opposed to the other two who sort of did some escapism when they went to college. They just never came home. They worked there in the summers and all. Like it was their way of sort of removing themselves from it.
Right.
And so when you and it was abusive, it was my father told me when I was very young that I was a mistake, that my parents only wanted 3 children and I was the youngest of 4. And so he told me, I see in hindsight that when he told me that, I was probably getting on his nerves. I was a brat, let's be honest.
Right.
And so, I'm not excusing him, but I do see in hindsight, he may have been drunk. Who knows if he had a bad day? Someone might have died, something like that. And so I grew up thinking that Father God was the same as Father, my dad. But here's the really perverse, weird way that it actually worked for me, or that God worked it for me so that I could still stay connected. You're probably going to think I'm crazy when I say this, but I loved Good Friday service when I was a little kid. And if you know anything about Good Friday, it's not really a celebration. Right. Jesus is being beaten and spit on and imprisoned and, wrongfully accused and all these things. I loved it because that's what I could identify with. And I knew that Jesus understood me. So I knew that no matter what was going on with this relationship with God, that Jesus would always understand me. And that he may not, I never really understood them as the same person. So even though Jesus couldn't help me, at least he loved me.
Right.
And so even in all those years when I ran from the church, when I ran away from organized religion, I never became an atheist or an agnostic even. I always knew that Jesus loved me.
Right.
And so that was a connection for me in a time when I couldn't see anything else, which I look at that and I say, thank God, thank God, even though it was a really kind of a perverse connection, it was still a connection, and I always stayed, I always wore a cross. I always still felt very grateful for Jesus. And so over time, I was able to, once I got into recovery, and I started to do that work with that counselor over the trauma in my childhood. And then especially when I got to seminary and started studying the same things my father had studied, I started to understand my dad more. He was 19 when my parents got married.
Wow.
He was way too young. He was way too young to get married and start a family. My mother was 4 years older than he was. And at that time, that was a spinster. Yeah. And she wanted babies. And so they started having babies right away. So he's in seminary and he's got little kids. And, my mom's
at 19.
Yeah, at 19. And my mom was a teacher and she was supporting them through her teacher's salary and putting him through school because his mother was against them getting married. So she paid for him to go through school. And so it was a really, really difficult beginning for them. Yeah. And it really, all through seminary, honestly, my father died 7 years before I got into seminary. And I really felt him guiding me. I felt him being a part of my seminary experience in a way that I don't think ever could have happened if he were still living, because he never he did find recovery from his alcoholism, but it never really took hold. He was never able to really let go of the bondage of himself in order
Right.
to grasp the program. And that,
Wow.
who knows why that is? I don't know. I don't care. I mean, it's different for everybody, but I do know today that he is a huge part of my spiritual connection, and that's not, I only attribute that to two things. One, the work that I've done and continue to do in forgiveness and my own recovery, and that God is really in charge of all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that as long as I'm looking to God and I'm following in the footsteps of my Savior, then I'm going to be saved in all my relationships. They're all going to heal. I'm going to be able to forgive everybody. Maybe not right now at this moment,
Right.
but I will.
It takes time.
It does take time, but I will be able to. Yeah.
Wow. So in the book, and I don't want to give too much away because otherwise people won't buy the book. They got to buy the book.
Yeah.
You mentioned being told never to ask why of God. How did that restriction influence your spiritual journey? And when did you finally allow yourself to ask the hard questions?
Well, it restricted it so much so that I left. The fact that I wasn't, my dad was just like, well, we don't ask why. We just know that God has our best interest in mind, or something like that, some kind of frothy, thing. And it was too difficult for me to not ask. I couldn't stay there. It seemed, I didn't know the word hypocritical when I was little, but that's it, that I knew that feeling like this isn't right. Why is this happening? Why am I in this family? Why is God, if God loves me, why is he putting me here? I remember asking my mom once, we were on vacation and my dad we used to go to the beach and he would get really, really drunk. He'd go out and play golf all day and drink. And then we'd all be on the beach and he'd come to the beach and sometimes we would hide from him because he was so embarrassing. And I remember we were sitting on the boardwalk watching the boats come in. There was an inlet by where we went. And I remember saying it, my mom and I were both crying because it had been a really bad situation in the house, in the little bungalow we were in. And I remember saying to her, why did God make wine? If this stuff makes Daddy so mean, why did God make wine? And she did not have an answer for me. And it was,
I don't think anybody would have an answer for that.
It was a horrifying question, I'm sure, for her. And the fact that she had no answer for me was horrifying to me.
Yeah.
Like that, like, here's this woman who's supposed to know everything. She's my mom, I was a little kid when I asked this question and there was no answer. And it really made me sad. Like, why would God do this to us? I couldn't make my brain understand anything. And so I just stopped asking questions.
Right.
Stopped because it was too horrifying to know that there was no answer. And so here's where it changed. When I got into recovery, I was 29 years old and I went to my first meeting for food addicts. And I got someone to help me walk me through the program within a couple of weeks. I asked somebody, I said, will you help me with this? Will you take me through the program? Which is pretty much what they tell you to do. Ask someone for help. And throughout this process of surrendering my food on a daily basis, because that's the basic gist, you've got to surrender what you're eating on a daily basis to another person, to your higher power, right? And that's really hard for somebody who has relied on food her whole life for comfort.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm doing this and I'm starting in doing that. I'm putting down my comfort, right? So now all this stuff that I've been pushing down with that comfort is popping up. All these why questions are popping up all over the place because I've been pushing them down with pizza and donuts and popcorn and any kind of sugary substance I can put on top of it. I'm pushing those things down, right? So I don't have to look at them. Well, now they're popping up all over the place. And I'm like, what do I do with these things? What do I do with this? And I remember her saying to me, what I'd really like you to do is I'd like you to write a letter to God.
Ooh.
And I'd like you to tell him everything you're angry about. And I said to her, we were on the phone. I remember we were on the phone. I remember sitting in the apartment I had at the time, looking at the wall, like, this woman's asking me to sign my death over, because if you question God, you get struck by lightning. Like that was in my head. Now, I don't remember anybody ever telling me that, but that was what I had in my head. Right.
Yeah.
And I said it out loud. I said to her, I can't do that. That's, you can't ask God these things. You can't tell God when you're angry. And and I didn't remember it at the time, but subconsciously I remembered that the last time I yelled at God, Jesus showed up and it scared the crap out of me.
Right.
So, so I was like, I can't do this. You can't ask God these questions. I'll get struck by lightning. I remember saying that, I'll get struck by lightning. And she said to me, and she had the most beautiful, soft, gentle voice, this woman. And she said to me, you know what, Jessica, I did it and I didn't get struck by lightning. She said, for today, could you just have faith in my process? Because I'm here and you've asked me for help and it has worked for me to do this. And so for today, could that just be your higher power, that you trust in this process and just write this letter? And I promise you, you will not be struck by lightning. And I said to her, well, you know what? What do I have to lose at this point? Because I don't want to go back to the other way, because I've already had some relief here. I've already had some peace from this sort of slavery to food, right? And she was the one who helped me to get to that place, right? So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to take this chance. And she said that I would read it to her and she would sit and listen. And if we both got struck by lightning, that would be okay with her. And, she was basically putting herself on the line for me, is what I thought. And so I did it. I asked every question. That letter was so long, and I got so angry. My fingers hurt. I had the paper was torn in some places because there was so much anger in me at that point. All these questions and all this anger that I had pushed down for 29 years came out onto that paper. And I remember sitting and reading it to her. It took a really long time because I cried so much. I just was doing that, that sort of, that cry, you can't catch your breath. Like there was so much. Yes. It was just, like here it all is, and she didn't even blink an eye. She was not shocked by any of it. She said to me, she said, I have a really good counselor who's going to help you with a lot of this stuff. She said, because a lot of this stuff is way outside of, I'm not a professional. I can't. She said, I can help you with the program. I can help you with your food, but there's a lot of trauma from your childhood that needs helping. And that's when she sent me to this counselor. And yeah. And so that's where it changed for me, because I was given permission to question, why is all this happening? Why? And you know what? I still don't have answers, other than the fact that I know that God knows way more than I will ever know as a human being. And as long as I'm trusting in God, these things, these questions, these confusions, I look around at the world today and I slap my forehead and go, what the heck is going on? Uh-huh. And, if I get sucked into trying to find out the answer to what the heck is going on, I'm in trouble. So I know I have to go, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you in this, that you're working something out here. And for today, I'm going to ask that you place my focus on what you want me to be doing just for today. keep my worries off of
Yes.
all that other stuff and place my focus on what is it today that I can do to further your kingdom right in front of me. Not all this other big stuff that I have no influence over, but who can I maybe pay for at the register today?
Ignore the negativity.
Yeah. Who can I let out in traffic that might just need that extra boost of someone being kind to them? It may be that little, but it may not be that little.
That sounds like that sounds like it would be a good daily exercise for everybody to do.
Imagine if everybody did that.
Uh-huh.
Imagine what would happen in the world if everybody just said, okay, today I'm just going to let one person out in traffic. That's all I'm going to do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Imagine all the love and everything, the lives that you could save.
Do you know what it makes me think of, actually, Rich? It makes me think of 9/11 happened.
Oh, how everybody came together.
2 years I was in recovery when that happened.
Oh, wow.
And I was so awake at that point to things that were going on, and I started to see people, the kindness.
Yep.
It was just, I'm getting a chill just thinking about it. Like, it was overwhelmingly beautiful to see the way people came together after that.
You're listening to Conversations with Rich Bennett. We'll be right back. One thing I've always believed in is trusting the people you work with. That's why when it comes to upgrading my home with new windows and doors, I'm going with Window Depot of Baltimore. They're a family-owned business, and I trust them because they deliver quality products at unbeatable prices. What really sold me? Besides Mike being so friendly, they're triple pane windows. These things are a game changer for energy efficiency, keeping your home cozy in winter and cool in the summer. Plus, they reduce outside noise. That's a huge bonus when you're recording podcasts like I do. And it's not just about the windows. Their entry doors, incredible. Whether it's fiberglass, steel, or something custom, Window Depot has you covered. So if you're thinking about upgrading your home, trust me, they will take care of you like family. Visit WindowDepotBaltimore.com or give them a call at 410-941-3499 and tell them Rich Bennett sent you. I've never have seen anything. The closest I ever recall anybody coming together like that was the Hands Across America thing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
That's the closest I've ever seen. And unfortunately, a lot of times it takes a tragedy to bring people back together.
Yeah.
9/11. Oh my, that pulled everybody together. I remember getting upset because I went to re-enlist and I was told I was too old.
Oh,
but
no.
But the funny thing is with that too, even, my brothers that I served with in the Marine Corps, we're all reaching out to each other, checking on each other. And of course, family, all of my family's local. But, oh man, the stories. I want to ask you about that letter.
Okay. Yes.
That you wrote.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you were reading it aloud, how did you feel after you finished reading the letter that you wrote?
Exhausted. Relieved. A little bit scared, because I was putting it all on the table for the first time in my life. I had been in counseling for probably about 10 years prior to getting into recovery, on and off, but I never really told the whole truth.
Yeah.
And a lot of those things were things I was ashamed of that I had no idea that other people ever experienced, ever did, ever talked about. I mean, my first meeting, my first meeting, I thought they had given, my first meeting for food addicts, I thought they had given a script to the girl who was sharing her story that night, because it might as well have been word for word for my story.
Wow.
And she was a thin, blonde, tall woman. And here I am, 5'4", dark hair, 150 pounds overweight. What is she going to have to tell me? And she
Right.
basically told me my story. And I really thought they had given her a script.
Wow.
And what happened was she had passed around during the meeting, she had passed around like a little photo album of pictures of herself before and after, just because a lot of times you don't believe it until you see it, and when her pictures got to me, she was almost finished telling her story. So I had heard almost the whole thing, thinking she's just been given a script. This wasn't really her story. So I started looking at her pictures and I could not believe it. I could not believe it. The not just the difference in her body sizes, because she had gained and lost a lot of weight in her lifetime, but the look in her eyes in the picture was the same desperation that I felt. And when I was looking at her in the meeting, she was bright. She was happy. Not everything was great in her life. And yet at the same time, she had this peace that I didn't think was even possible in a person.
Uh-huh.
And so, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a beautiful, wonderful, relieving feeling that is also terrifying at the same time, because a lot of work has to happen for me to get there.
I'm sitting there thinking, and I don't know if it would be a good idea or not, maybe better for the professionals, but like if you know somebody that's going through problems, ask them, say, why don't you write a letter to God, list the questions you have, and read it to me. But me being a professional may not be a good idea.
Well,
or it could be because I could be crying along with them.
It's interesting. There is a real pull in my heart. When I was in seminary, I tripped over spiritual direction. I didn't even know spiritual direction was a thing. I didn't know it was something that you could get a certificate in and help other people in that way. And it's basically just for people who want to help others. It was a Catholic tradition for a very long time, where priests would do it for people, and where you would just go and sit with the priest and talk about your journey with God. And the priest would help to point out things for you that you couldn't see because you were too close to it. A lot of times it's hard to see God working in your own life. But someone else who's non-biased, bystander can go, wow, I see God all over the place here, and that's what you do as a spiritual director. And that's kind of what you do when you're helping someone walk through recovery. Right. You're pointing out to them, you're helping them to see the places where they should see gratitude, because for so long we've pointed at the negative. We've stayed in that victim role and we've said, oh, woe is me. This is why I, eat too much, or this is why I drink too much because of this. If you had my life, you'd drink a lot too. That kind of thing. We're constantly pointing towards the negative. But once we put all those angers down, which does take a professional for a lot of people. Yeah. Once we were able to work through those things, she also helped me to start a gratitude list, which to this day, 25 plus years later, I do 5 things I'm grateful for every single day and why.
5 things?
5 things every single day. 5 things I'm grateful for and why I'm grateful for them. Like, I can say that I'm grateful today for my recovery, right? I could use that every day as one of my gratitudes. But why today? What was it today that made me grateful for my recovery? Not yesterday, not tomorrow, today. Why am I grateful for my recovery today? And it makes me center in on something different each day that I'm able to point to. And if you think about that, I don't know, I've never been good at math. I don't know what 25 times 365 days is, but I can tell you that's a lot of gratitude. That is a lot of gratitude for recovery alone. And then there's 4 other things on my list every day.
Wow. Okay. So now I need to change my morning routine. No, I love that though, because every morning when I wake up, before I get out of bed, I got a little angel, and I'll hold it. I'll say a prayer. Then I got a little rock that my daughter found when she was little. I call it my grateful rock, and I say something that I'm grateful for. I never say why.
Yeah.
And I should do that. And I love the idea of 5 things that you're grateful for.
Yeah.
Throughout the day. And God, those of you listening, try it, because I guarantee you're just going to feel so much better throughout the day. Do it in the morning when you wake up. Do it at lunch.
Yeah.
Do it when you have a snack. Do it at dinner. And then, of course, always before you go to bed.
Yeah.
Always before you go to bed.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'll even give you I'll give you a teaser. I have a friend in recovery who I text exchange with her our gratitudes each day. So we're committed to each other to do it. And she's so funny because sometimes I would say more often than not, on a Monday night, I'll get her gratitude list. And the first thing will be, I'm grateful that Monday only comes once a week. And here's why. And it always makes me laugh, because it's like, even if we're looking at it that way, it's better than just sitting in the muck,
I look forward to Mondays. I do. It's, and I guess when you love what you're doing.
Yeah. It's different.
You look forward to it.
Yeah.
Although I still cannot get that song out of my head from the Boomtown Rats. Tell me why I don't like Mondays.
Oh, okay. See, mine was when I'm an 80s kid. I was born 1970. So in the 80s, I was in high school, and that song Manic Monday was,
local news channel here used to play. They may still play it.
It gets stuck in my head when I hear it. Ugh. But anyway.
Yeah. And I was a DJ. I started DJing in the 80s, and I had requests for that a lot. Yeah. In the clubs.
Yeah.
It's like, no, why?
We were a weird group of people.
I tell you, I love the 80s though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but when it came to music, well, I mean, the 60s and 70s were great, but the hair metal bands.
Have you seen Rock of Ages?
Yes.
It's a great show. Yeah.
Yes, I have that. Yeah. And that you're giving me flashbacks here, Jessica. I used to have hair back then.
I actually have a great idea for a Broadway show, but I think it's somehow impossible. I've actually talked to a couple people about it, where you use the people, the writers and everything would use popular music to tell the story of the Bible, the Old and New Testament, and we would call it God Rocks, right? Get it?
Oh, I love that.
And it would, I even have some really great songs, like for when the Israelites are wandering around in the desert, following Moses around in the desert, and they're complaining and they're, back and forth with Moses. They would sing the Clash song, "Should I Stay or Should I Go?"
Should I stay? But the thing is, you could take songs like that and somehow or another turn it around to where it has a meaning.
Oh yeah, I have the whole thing mapped out.
Well, how come you haven't done it yet?
Well, because I talked to a theater guy about it, and he said, first of all, it'd be really, really difficult to get rights to all those different songs.
Depending, it costs a lot of money.
It would cost a lot of money. Like, I would have to be established before I even went down that road to try to, and he gave me some great ideas about doing little vignettes and putting them on YouTube and all that stuff. At the time I was working full time when I talked with him.
Right.
And I'm actually not anymore. So I don't know that I have an excuse not to research this a little bit more now that we're talking about it. But I mean, remember the song, Personal Jesus by Depeche Mode? That would be John the Baptist preaching.
Oh,
Get it? And I have a couple like John Lennon, Beatles, like all over the Elvis, like a bunch of different all over the map, so that because the idea being that it would be music that would attract people to the show because they know it from popular culture.
Right.
And then they would get a lesson while they were there, kind of like a Godspell sort of thing. But
oh, wow.
Yeah. Remember Godspell?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
wow.
Anyway,
All
sorry.
right,
I digress.
I'm showing my age now. Jeez. With the book, what was the hardest part of the book for you to write? Which chapter? Or was it the very beginning, the preface of it?
No, actually, this book kind of came to be over about a 5-year period. I did that professor that I had Intro to New Testament with, who spurred the first idea. When I went to him to talk about the idea that I had for my thesis, for my master's thesis, he suggested that I do an individual study on eschatology first, so that I would do all the research on that first. Right. And I would have a real strong understanding of what eschatology really was. And so I did that study with him, which was amazing. That was a God thing because he was so crazy smart. He kind of scared me. But here I was sitting in his office for a whole semester, just me and him, and talking about eschatology. And it was amazing because not only did I learn a lot from him, but I held my own, which kind of surprised me about myself. That I was smart enough to actually sit in a room alone with this guy and talk for a whole semester about this. And so it gave me a little bit more confidence to take the next step, which was to make it a thesis idea. And then I worked with another professor who became my thesis advisor because he was pretty much an expert on the Gospel of John, which is where I took a lot of the book from, my thesis from. And after I wrote my thesis to get an A, and I'm going to be honest and tell you, I wanted to get an A. That was the main goal there, right? And he did say to me, though, at one point, what's your point in all of this? What do you really want to accomplish here? Other than the grade, let's put the grade aside. What would you really like to accomplish with this message? And I started to think about that. And I thought, I want to help people to not be afraid of God. I want to help people to not be afraid of the end times, because I spent a lot of time being afraid Jesus is going to return and I'm going to be one of those people who gets thrown into the fire.
Right.
And so after I presented my thesis, and after I graduated in May of 2020. So it was a pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And the world pretty much felt like it had come to an end already.
Right.
And I started writing the book because I knew that my thesis was not done. I had to incorporate my story into this academic paper, right? And that's where I started writing about the deep dive that I did into the trauma of my childhood, into overcoming the addiction, not on my own, with the help of other people, with the help of God, with God guiding every single moment. And in writing that, I would say not the hardest moment, but I can tell you that the moment when, and I'll share this with you, I might get emotional because it was a really emotional moment when it came to me, when it happened. I was writing, and I was writing the chapter about letting go of perfect knowledge, Jessica. Okay. Because that was the one who wanted to get the A. That was that girl, right?
Okay.
She needed to be get rid of too, because she was getting in the way. All right. She was getting in the way of really knowing God.
Okay.
And what happened as I was writing that chapter is I was relaying a moment when I shared there was one class I took where you had to share your whole spiritual journey. And the professor in that class was a PhD, but he was also a master in divinity. So he was also a reverend. And at that point, it was early in my seminary studies, I still didn't quite trust the reverend. Okay. And so anybody who had the reverend in front of their name, I was still a little suspicious of them. Okay. Because that was still my dad. Even though I had a lot of recovery at that point, I was still a little suspicious of the whole organized religion thing. And so he was my professor and I was respectful towards him, but I also was like, I'd rather have just a PhD. Right. And so I didn't quite want to trust him. And when I was telling my story, I shared with the class what I had shared with you earlier in this discussion about how I was always connected to Jesus. And what I wrote in my story at that point was because his father had abandoned him as my father had abandoned me. And that professor gasped. I could hear, I was just reading my story off the paper and I heard an audible, and I looked up and I saw that it was him. And I was like, oh, and I was brought into the moment. I was brought off the paper and I was brought into the moment, and I realized what I had said. And I started to cry. And I went from telling my story to living it again. And I made it through. Like, he asked me to take a moment and collect myself, because I tried to keep going. I wanted to ignore the fact that I was crying. I wanted to keep going and get the A, Right. And he asked me to stop, and I collected myself. I finished my story. People came up to me after class and they were like, they gave me hugs and, thanks for being so vulnerable and all that stuff. And which was all lovely. I'm not dismissing that, but I went out of the classroom at the end of it, and the professor was standing there waiting for me. And he asked me, he said, Jessica, I was really struck by what you shared in class today. And he said, I'm wondering, have you ever read the Gospel of John, not for a class, but just for yourself? And this is what I did. I gave him the answer I learned in Intro to New Testament. And I said, I just learned in Intro to New Testament that if you want to know what Jesus really said, you should look for it in more than one place. So if it's in more than one of the Gospels, then he probably really said it, because more than one person is reporting on it. And what I learned in Intro to New Testament, that the Gospel of John is very different than the other three. And so, I don't know that that's really what Jesus said. Right. That's what I said to him, right? And he got this big smile on his face. And I'm writing this now, okay? I'm writing this for the book, and I'm living it again. And I realize I had such suspicion of this man, right? And at this moment in time, I was looking directly at him. He was the face of Jesus.
Oh, wow.
Because he smiled when I gave him that academic answer. And he said to me, would you do me a favor? And would you please just read the Gospel of John for yourself? He said, I really think that you will get a lot out of the father-son relationship in that gospel. And I think it will be really helpful to you on your journey. And then he just walked away. He didn't make me commit to doing it. He just said, I'd really like you to do it for yourself. And he started to walk away, and I turned and I watched him, and he turned around and he looked at me. He goes, you won't be sorry, Jessica.
Wow.
And while I was writing that, the light that I saw coming out of that man when I was writing it, okay, not in the moment, because in the moment I was I remember walking away thinking, well, now I have to read it so that I can tell him I did. That's where I was at that moment, right? But when I was writing it, I saw the light that was there. So I was overcome by the fact in the memory of writing it, that was the same semester that I had Intro to New Testament. And it was about a month before the end of the semester. So it was about a month before that idea was revealed to me. And it was that month that I read the Gospel of John.
Wow.
For myself, not for a grade, not to tell anybody about it, but just for myself. And look what God gave me. He gave me the idea that spurred everything that's led up until this moment.
I
know it's almost too much.
It's well, no, your story is amazing. And we haven't even talked about a lot of things because, well, we got to save them for next time. Actually, is there going to be a second book as well?
Well, right now I'm working on a meditation on Jesus's sayings, and I'm gonna set it up so that there can be some journal space because writing has been so important to me. I want to share what I've learned from what Jesus has said or what I've interpreted, and then give people some questions. Whoever's reading it, some questions to guide them in their own process. Because that's what it's about, helping each other to interpret for our own personal journey.
All right. So something very important before I get to my last question.
Okay.
Tell everybody where they can find Higher Powered, One Woman's Journey of Personal Eschatology, as well as your website, because you got the blog and everything on your website.
Yes, I have. And I also wrote another book that was published right before I got into seminary, which is, that's a daily devotion. You can find both my books on Amazon. I have a daily devotion called Dewdrops, which is morning meditations to cultivate faith, love, and service. And that's for anybody, not just people in recovery. I mean, it's good. People in recovery will get a lot from it, but pretty much anybody can read that one. And then Higher Powered is also on Amazon, and they're almost exactly 10 years apart. Dewdrops was published in October of 2014, and Higher Powered was published in September of 2024. And so they're both on Amazon, and you can find my website is just my name with my middle initial, jessicalmorris.com. And I have all kinds of information there. The books are there that will, they'll lead you to Amazon to purchase them. But my blog's there, information about spiritual direction, my story, it's all there.
And don't wait another 10 years to publish the next book.
No. I will say, thanks to my wonderful husband, I was able to leave my 30 plus year career in higher education fundraising.
Oh, wow.
I left that career in October to begin to try to really make this writing ministry work. And he's carrying the financial load for us right now. And what he said to me was, he's a little bit older than I am. And he said, I would really, really like to retire when I'm 65. So if you could have health insurance by then, that'd be great. So I have about 2 years to see what I can make happen with this writing ministry. So God bless him. I'm so grateful.
That is awesome. Yeah, my wife keeps asking me how come she, when am I going to make more money so she can retire?
Yeah.
That's one thing I don't think I'll ever do, just because I love doing what I'm doing. I keep telling everybody I'll be 100 years old and still be doing this.
Well, this isn't work. This to me is just passion.
Well, it is but remember what I said earlier, and it may have been before we started recording, that if work should be fun.
Yeah.
And since I have sponsors, well, technically it's work, and it is a lot. Doing a podcast is a lot of work.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes.
Oh yeah. But it's fun. I love it. Okay. So my last question, I have a funny feeling I'm going to know the answer for this.
Okay.
And I'm not going to ask you what you think I'm probably going to ask.
Okay.
You. All right. So tell us who Paul E. Clark is. Tell us a little bit about him.
Oh, I love that you asked me this.
Told you it wasn't going to be a question I normally ask.
And I'm just taking a moment. Paul, I'll tell you why I'm crying right now is joy. Absolute joy over the fact that God put this man in my life. He became the chaplain where I worked in that degree of, or that career of higher education fundraising in 2004. And that's when I was about 5 years in recovery at that point.
Okay.
And he was the first, I'm going to put bunny ear quotes for those who aren't watching me right now. I'm putting bunny ear quotes around this. He was the first man of the cloth in my whole life that I was able to trust. And it was simply because of who he was. I mean, it was, he absolutely he was not in recovery, but he had a pure gift for working with people who were. And he had been my spiritual mentor up until the day he died in September of 2023. So a year before the book came out. He was, if I could have chosen a father.
Yeah.
He encouraged me. He loved me where I was. He accepted me where I was. And I was crazy in early recovery. I mean, I might have been sober, but I was off my nut half the time, you know?
Right.
And we would just sit and talk for hours about Jesus, about everything. So he was the dad I would have chosen.
For those of you listening, if you're wondering why I asked her about Paul Clark, it's because that's who the book is dedicated to.
Yes.
And I have a funny feeling that your father and Paul checked out your book from the library up there in the Pearly Gate Library and are very proud of you. And don't be surprised if you're going to get something in the mail and it's going to be your book from them asking for your autograph.
You know what's interesting? I will just say very quickly about this, that when I was sending the book out to publishers, I hadn't put a dedication page in yet. Mm-hmm. And I just decided, I'm like, you know what? Because my first book I dedicated to all those who'd gone before me in recovery because they just had helped me so much. And I thought, you know what, this man, I'm dedicating this directly to him. You know, I don't care if it hurts anybody else's feelings. I want it to go to him. He was the one who really, you know, guided me all along this way. And so I did it. And then I sent it out to another publisher. And I left the house right after I did that. I left the house and I went to the grocery store for just regular stuff. And I went to my regular grocery store and there was Paul's wife, who it wasn't her regular grocery store. She just happened to be there. And I said to her, you are not going to believe. You are not going to believe what I'm going to tell you right now. I really believe it was him saying, I saw what you did.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Everybody listen, make sure you get this book. And after you read it, you know what I'm going to say, make sure you leave a full review.
Yes, please do.
You're going to love it. And don't pass it on to someone else. Purchase another copy.
Several
copies.
Did my husband call you, Rich, and tell you to say that?
No, you know what? Here's the funny thing, Jessica, because when I one of the books that really changed, well, two books that really changed my life was The Secret. And the second one was Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom.
Yes.
And my mother had cancer at the time. And after I finished reading it, Tuesdays with Morrie, I gave it to my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped her a lot.
Yes.
And she went into remission afterwards. And then that book just kept getting passed on and passed on. Well, I wanted to read it again. I couldn't find the book. So, and for the longest time, I would tell people when I've had authors on the podcast, I would tell them, after you read the book, pass it on to somebody else. Let them enjoy it too. And now it's like, wait a minute. No, purchase the book for someone else because, libraries are important. However,
yes.
yeah, but and the thing is, books make awesome presents.
Yep.
Your other one, Dewdrops. Oh, could you imagine if they're in all the recovery homes and everything? That would make even this book.
Yeah.
Would make a big difference. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I also love to tell people is, especially with a book like this, you don't have to purchase it just for a person. Purchase it for a business or a nonprofit. Purchase several of them. Yeah. And, one of the things that I think where a lot of businesses don't realize this, one of the ways you can make a donation is to purchase a mess load of books and give it to an organization that it'll help.
Yep.
Because that's one of when it comes to reading and knowledge and educating, that's the greatest gift I believe you can. One of the greatest gifts you can give.
And you know what? One of the greatest compliments I've ever received from anybody was this woman I just happened to run into at a recovery meeting. And this was recent, actually. And she said to me, I heard you just wrote another book. I have your first one. She said, you know why I have it? And I said, no, why? And she goes, because I was seeing Steve, who's the counselor that I talk about in the book. And she's like, and it was in his waiting room. And I just picked it up while I was waiting and I started reading it. And I thought, I need to get this book. She didn't know me then,
Right.
And so she was giving me a double compliment because she was saying, wow. I got your book and Steve had it on display in his office, like, whoa, my mind was blown,
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's
that's
like,
great.
you just never know. You never know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And the thing is when your book, and I guarantee you it saved people's lives and it's changed people's lives without a doubt.
I hope so. And I hope it helps people to not be afraid.
You're making a difference, Jessica. And I want to thank you.
Thank you.
That.
And so are you, Rich. So are you.
Oh, thanks. Yes. Jessica, thank you so much. I cannot wait to talk to you again. And once I talk to my other co-host, I'll let her know so I can, then I'll let you know because I have no idea when we're going to start recording again.
Like I said, I'm at your service. Here I am.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Conversations with Rich Bennett. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned something from it as I did. If you'd like to hear more conversations like this, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a moment, I'd love it if you could leave a review. It helps us reach more listeners and share more incredible stories. Don't forget to connect with us on social media or visit our website at conversationswithrichbennett.com for updates, giveaways, and more. Until next time, take care, be kind, and keep the conversations going.